it was all very freeform, the ideas we were exploring, but we're sort of talking about the science and then thinking about how the science integrates into relationships and how sort of neurons are in relationships.
And I said about this idea of the concept of having you two as the neurons being connected. And then because we're all gay men, we started talking about Adam and Steve, and this idea of the kind of the genealogy of neurons, because they actually have family trees.
The final image we've actually ended up with, it's quite a strong connection with the audience, the person who's looking at the image.
Yeah.
And it's, what is that, interpreting that signal that's coming from that image.
Conway suggested a sort of big, flouncy pink dress. And needless to say, for Killing Eve, it's got to be the Killing Eve dress. So we moved forward from that. And then we started talking about how they use sugar. And this is why Conway is eating a marshmallow to represent the sugar.
Yeah, we talked about trying to show yeast making all these things, making bread and medicine and biofuel, and then said, okay, but is it correct to the spirit of the project to look at yeast through the eyes of what it can do for humanity? What would yeast do if just left to its own devices? Yeah. It would just eat sugar and multiply.
From the start, we had a clear idea that we wanted to create a mosaic, because some of the expression of bacteriophage is that on tobacco plants, they form a mosaic.
But also it represents the shape of it as well, doesn't it? So there's kind of a duality of why we wanted to make a mosaic.
I think there was this idea of sort of the break in the epidermal layer, both of the flower, and then it resonated with me with stretch marks. I've always had stretch marks, but also this idea of the beauty, a fleeting beauty coming from a breaking, a splitting up. And so I think that both myself and Lee picked up on this quote: any tulip, thus changing its original colour, is usually ruined afterwards, and so wanted only to delight its master's eyes with this variety of colour before dying, as if to bid him a last farewell. So it's almost like the beauty of this flower is for the eyes, the master's eye, so that they can behold it and then they disappear, they die, sort of the pleasing of the male's gaze, in a sense. The idea for the aesthetics of the image, we shifted from the idea of having, the face, the human. We wanted the beauty to be held elsewhere, or this idea of breaking beauty. And the framing of the image, we also use a particular lens where it superimposes images. So it creates a layer, it's kind of like an epidermical layer, and it breaks up the image. So we wanted the image also to break as well as the things appearing in the image.
The one that we got really early on with the cordyceps is from this kind of, I think it's early 1900s collection of short stories called The King in Yellow. The thing with the cordyceps fungus is that it gets inside ants, and once it's inside them, it alters their behavior. In the original book, The King in Yellow, people finding this play called The King in Yellow, and then when they read it, they lose control of their mind, or they start acting against their own interest. That was a starting point.
We discussed who was going to produce the picture, the image for this microbe. Conway had a go at both the yeast and the cordyceps. I think Conway was happier with the yeast images, but not so happy with the cordyceps. So we nipped over and picked up the costumes from Conway's house, and we came back. And we spent a few days sort of playing around in the garden in the backwoods.
We like the idea of this kind of wealth and luxury, and I'm moving through this world and I can adapt it any way I know how, and I'm going to give you diarrhea along the way. Mm-hmm. It's that kind of vibe.
You'll definitely remember me. Yeah.
Yeah. And just that kind of bit of humour as well, of just combining filth and glamour together. Mm-hmm. I like John Waters is one of my major influences. And so that philosophy is very present in most of my work as well.
We kind of came up with the idea of headpieces, didn't we?
Yeah, and this idea came really early too. And the connection we had with the colors, because we were mentioning the blue color, and at the end it appeared that really our pictures talk to each other. Along the process, it became more and more fun, because we evade from the microbes, and we get more. We invented and you push me to invent and to escape from the biology. Immediately, Archie was imagining things and getting far from the reality of the microbe. For example, he chose this blue color for Shigella, but Shigella is not blue, but that did not matter at all.
I had this little chip potato paper, which when you look at the images of or the representations of Shigella, it's very similar. So I made this kind of head mask that you can eat. So it looks like it's invading you and then coming into your mouth. And then at the same time, you're kind of spewing out stuff.
We had a fantastic conversation in nature to start with, because it originated in Prince's Park. I had spent an earlier day on Arc Lane in a wonderful little shop called Frida Mo's that was filled with disco balls and go-go boots and glitter. And I kept thinking, can you imagine this incorporated into a calendar photo, and how cool would that be? And then as Anna Laura and I got speaking and discussing this, we had very similar ideas about Strombidium. So it was this idea of a disco, raving, glittery, high energy creature in the ocean.
So the moment came to us, this coincidence that you had been to the shop and there was the disco ball that in a sense made us think of the mermaid and the scales of the mermaid and how they're reflective. And similarly, sort of like we exchanged some stories around the mermaid and the grim tale of the mermaid, of how there's a tale of incompatible love. But we wanted to reverse the story a little bit. The mermaid as this agent of herself and giving up the tail for dancing feet. They bleed through the night, but because they're dancing all night. So this hedonistic creature that makes itself into a hybrid for the love of, lights and disco and being out.
With Wolbachia, it was interesting because we spoke with Rod about Wolbachia, which was interesting to have Rod's perspective and Yasmin's perspective, because they were both accurate, but they were done from a different lens. Yasmin kind of thought of this idea of the stiletto murderer, and it works so perfectly. Like, it just makes complete sense of having this shoe that was invented by men to make women look sexier. Using that shoe to kill a man is kind of incredibly hot and badass. And I kind of decided in my head, I was like, she seems like a very arrogant, full of herself kind of thing.
Our kind of initial conversations were about like sort of paganistic kind of relationships with the land, and about kind of non-human kind of networks of organizing intelligence, or non-human intelligences. Did we talk about?
Yeah, technologies, yeah.
And thinking about like kind of kitschy imagery. Yeah. And I think our very
with phones,
and like phone lines, and we really wanted to do an image that we were both part of that was more about showing that network of communication than showing one person. And then Liverpool's risk level went up, and suddenly we weren't allowed to meet between households.
Yeah. So I was drying some alliums from the garden. It made me think of the rosettes of parasites. When Leishmania kind of clumps together, they call them like rosettes, which is kind of cute. So I thought it would be nice to have a human cell, which is getting surrounded by all these Leishmania clumps and kind of is dying, or kind of knowing that it's about to die. So I'm wearing like a Ghanaian print dress, and then there's the background that's also got like the Ghana prints. But the Ghana print is like me bringing my heritage, but also like bringing in like what got me interested in Leishmania, and the fact that Leishmania is in Africa, like present in Africa, which is something that's not really spoken about.
I'd never done any kind of performative work before, so I was kind of saying like, right, what are we going to do, how are we going to get organized, let's take everything down that we need, and you were like, we'll go there and the performance will happen. So I'm like, what but we need I need a list, and it was like a joy and a relief to work in a completely different way, where not everything needs to be allocated and measured in some sense or another.
Because I think what happens in a lot of these sort of collaborations is like scientists just sort of feed ideas to the artists and they don't sort of participate and they don't take anything back. And I think we sort of had the opportunity to be involved and then take something back and learn something about what it's like to, you know, perform as an artist, which probably it doesn't usually happen that in that sort of bi-directional way.
I wish I could get out more. I wish I could escape my scientific world more and embrace more of this cross-fertilization of ideas and experiences.
Yeah, we're definitely outside our comfort zones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite nice. I'm not like, especially having this kind of thing happen in lockdown, where you can just easily stay in your little bubble and not do anything new. It's really nice to be able to have conversations with Dee and just learn about things that I've always been interested in but not been able to have access to.
I can say that I've learned a lot about myself in terms of, and actually how human parasites and viruses are. There's a humanity to it that I've learned, that we're a universe in ourselves, really.
I think the smaller you get and the more you get into the minutiae of the world and this ecosystem and this planet, the more you can realise and see how every single action that is taken, every single environmental change or anything has a significant impact on everything else.
Our concept of ourselves as humanity separate from the rest of, like as a separate entity from microbial life, is like illusory and really destructive.
Microbes underpin the life of the planet.
If we study them, we can break all of our barriers as humans. All the barriers we have.
I think part of this project isn't just about the Shigella or the cowpox or the other things. It's also about getting to know people, and I've thoroughly enjoyed that.
The most important is that really we had really fun. It was great from the beginning to the end, and I hope it's not the end.